Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming out on a Thursday evening to our very first event for PAMELA. I'm Laura. I'm one of the LAPG board members, and PAMELA actually it's named after my mum. I think my 13-year-old daughter helped me come up with it, but of course it stands for Peri-menopause and Menopause Legal Aid Support Network, and yeah, we need that, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we're here, and I'm so excited to have Kate Muir here today, whose book I read and listened to, and totally transformed my life. So I just want to say a few words before I hand over to Kate. First of all, we are we are going to record this session just so that we can share this knowledge. But when it comes to individual contributions and discussion, none of that is going to be shared online without anyone, unless people give specific permission. The words need to come out in the right way. So please just feel completely relaxed and free. This needs to be a safe space for all of us. And there is lots of food in the corner, and we will have time afterwards to eat and drink and connect. And I think that's really partly why I wanted to set this organisation up. Some of you know I set up Young Legal Aid Lawyers 20 years ago, and LAPG now has just celebrated its 40th or 45th anniversary, whichever way you look at it. And it seems to me that legal aid work is literally, and advice sector work is fueled by women, often slightly older women, and 70% of all legal aid lawyers are women. And yet we are terrible at looking after ourselves, and we're terrible sometimes at acknowledging that we need to sort of just step back and realize we are human too. We are, we behave in superhuman ways, but we are human too. And I think my own experience, which I think I talked about at the last LAPG conference, I was diagnosed with long COVID and then fibromyalgia before I finally sort of had did the detective work and realized I just needed a lot more estrogen. All those symptoms that I had all these male doctors diagnosing me with, they were all just basic symptoms of the perimenopause, and that transformed my life. And then the other thing I've realized in my own experience is that it's not just a one-off, that you feel in a certain way, you get some help, and you understand your own menopausal symptoms. So it's a kind of work in progress, right? So then another few months along the line, I'm feeling awful again, and it takes another 3 months for me to realize, shucks, actually need some testosterone. How many meetings have I had to sit in meetings with ministers in my campaigning activity? How many parole board hearings have I had to say, I have 3 points, 1, 2, menopause. And I do say that because and there were times when the third point just was not coming back until I managed to get on a little bit of testosterone. So I think from my own experience, and the other thing I just want to mention briefly, because I think it's important to get it out there, is that the work we do is so stressful. We're dealing with people's lives, liberty, roofs over their head, their children, and that is so anxiety inducing. And yet actually one of the main things about perimenopause and menopause is that huge level of anxiety. And I know across the professions there's not a huge amount of research on it, but it's something we've already been talking about, is that many women just sort of fall off, right? It just all gets too much, and that anxiety is too much. So how much more is it for us as legal aid lawyers dealing with everybody else's anxiety all the time? And I think for myself, I recently got made an honorary KC, and you'd think that would be like, a time when you're feeling sort of invincible or something. But in the week after my party, which was really lovely and amazing, I had such raging self-doubt. It was unbelievable. In between sort of performing and doing lectures and training and hearings, in those moments in between, all those feelings, did I do this right? Or did I spend enough time with that person? Do I deserve this? And what, why, and, I think it was my family said, Mummy, are you having enough estrogen? It's like, I'm taking my nighttime one, and it's not always going to be the answer. Not for everyone, the answer isn't always going to be more hormones. Different things would be for different people, but we do need to listen to ourselves and understand our own needs. And the last thing I just want to say is it's not just us, right? We're talking about human condition here, and it's our clients too. So I know Farhana's going to talk to us in a minute about the trailblazing work that she's been doing, thinking about how menopause affects her clients and family law. But I think we need to start thinking about that across the board. My women clients in prison being literally penalized, given additional days, being told they can't have visits with their family for rude and abusive and threatening behavior, when perhaps they're just feeling really stressed because they're going through menopause. What about housing? Overcrowding is one thing, but I've got constituents in where I'm a local councillor who are, women who are going through the menopause having to share their bedroom with their 12-year-old children. I mean, it's not, we need to start thinking creatively for our clients who are also affected by these things. And I think that's something that I hope as a group, as we connect and develop this further, we can support each other, we can share ideas, policies, experiences, but also think how we can use it to develop better structures for our clients as well. So I'm really happy to see everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I would just absolutely so thrilled to have Kate here as well. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, because you'll do that much better than I will.
Is that right?
Big round of applause for Kate.
Hello, I am so pleased to be here because this issue is really close to my heart, and I've also written and worked with Farhana Shahzady, who's going to talk a little bit in the middle of the presentation about the effect of just keep that quiet, about the effect of menopause on clients as well. I've got a law degree, but I've never ever used it from Glasgow University, and it hasn't come in useful till today. I did study jurisprudence, and I did study law, and of course lots of my friends are lawyers, and indeed my partner is a barrister, and he is now training to be a psychotherapist. He was a criminal legal aid barrister. What does that tell you? And I should have brought him actually, except he's at psycho school tonight, as it was. I know how tough people's lives are doing criminal legal aid, and the sort of people he was doing with that, he just didn't feel he could do enough for them in the end. And he was, like we were talking about, incredibly stressed. So I have seen that. Now I'm going to talk generally about menopause and perimenopause, and I know you're all at different stages and different levels, but hopefully I can kind of bring it all together, and you can think about yourself, your friends, your clients, and see where the amount of knowledge we can put together today brings us. So mostly I'm going to talk about mental health today, because one of the things that I have really learned as time has gone on, and I've written now 3 books, which are basically saying to people, look at the world through hormonal glasses. Understand women's hormones, and you understand so much of their behavior and their problems. It really makes a huge difference. And it doesn't have to be about HRT, but it is about people being able to see themselves clearly and understand what is happening to them. And we have not been told that. We've dissected frogs at school. We have never been told about the menopause. And obviously it does affect half the planet and all their partners. So I've also got a book about the pill, and if any younger women want to talk to me about that later, that's a whole mental health issue as well, the kind of flattening effect of the pill on about a third of women. So and certainly in prisons, just talking, we went to Eastwood Park the other day to talk about menopause, and I was talking to quite a lot of young women in the prison who just had implants stuffed in them every few months, and they had terrible mental health flattening, and they couldn't have a discussion about that. They couldn't get things changed. So there's I mean, this is huge, isn't it? But I'm going to start. I'm going to start with my own menopause and a little bit about Davina as well. So my own menopause was just, it was not just a car crash, but the full Thelma and Louise off the cliff stuff. What happened? I mean, I got divorced, I lost my job, did all sorts of daft things. But one of the things was I didn't notice my own perimenopause while this was happening. And I think now of perimenopause as menopause's dastardly little sister, because it lurks there, you still get your periods, and it's doing things to your head. And that is what I came to understand. And at the same time as I was dealing with my perimenopause, my mum had just died of Alzheimer's. And one day on Saturday, I was writing a shopping list, and I thought, must shave the legs. And I wrote down the word shaver. I thought, there's definitely another word for the thing in the bathroom. And I went and looked at it, and I couldn't think of what it was called. And I thought, oh my God, I can't remember the word razor after about 15 minutes. I've got Alzheimer's, because I kept forgetting words. I was the film critic at the Times at the time. And so I was occasionally forgetting the name of the film, but this was a domestic noun. And I thought, oh my God, I am really losing my memory. And that is terrifying in terms of confidence of women. Just as you were saying, 1, 2, 3, menopause. Yeah. That moment when you pause, on your feet making a presentation, and that silence seems like 10 minutes. And the kind of, you feel the rest of the room looking at you. And in fact, they're probably not, but it feels it's a real confidence loser, that moment. And it can occur any time in your 40s and younger for women who get younger, earlier menopause. So it's not as if, it isn't happening to all of us at various times. But anyway, so I had that memory loss. I also was waking up every night with incredible heart palpitations and anxiety. And I wake up at 4 panicking like a cartoon Disney kind of, heart going like mad. I got my heart checked on the NHS, I got the palpitations measured. As it turned out, I rang all my friends and I said, I've got Alzheimer's, I don't know what to do. And they were like, you're really stupid, you just need to go on HRT, but we don't talk about it. And I was like, and they were all people, in senior positions in the media, actually, at the Times and things, who'd got their HRT privately. And this was 10 years ago, so there was not a culture of people walking into rooms like this and being honest. Anyway, a week later, got the HRT, didn't get a single heart palpitation ever again. Memory came back within about a week. And now, I can talk rubbish for an hour to an audience. And it doesn't affect me at all. But for me, I had just thought menopause was about hot flushes. I didn't, the word perimenopause wasn't on the NHS website. It wasn't really known. And I felt I'd experienced a miracle in that I had got my memory back. I got rid of that panic about having Alzheimer's. And, I got rid of these heart palpitations that were waking me up in the middle of the night. And I also found, of course, I'm a runner and my joint problems went away. And these were 3 symptoms that I did not understand to be part of menopause. And women didn't then, and lots of women still don't now. They all still think it's hot flushes, they'll go away. And we now know menopause is a long-term hormonal deficiency. And one way or the other, you've got to change your lifestyle to cope with it, because it really, really profoundly affects us. And that's not a bad thing. That can be an incredibly positive thing. And it can be a reason to take action, hormones and lifestyle. Anyway, having gone through this myself, being an investigative journalist, I'm going like, where's the information on this? There was none. So I pitched a documentary to Channel 4, and they said, and various other broadcasters said, no, thank you, that's about old women, we don't like that, it's not our demographic. So in the end, we got hold of Davina, who was fantastic, asked her to be presenter, and she had her menopause at 44, when she stopped being able to read the auto cue, and found that when she was sitting in the makeup chair, she said, could you switch off the heater on the makeup chair? And they're going, there is no heater on the makeup chair. And she agreed to kind of expose herself in this way, which was quite, at that kind of level of celebrity perfection, to be honest about your vaginal dryness on telly. Well done, Sabina. It was fantastic. So we did this, and the documentaries kind of took off on WhatsApp, and women were kind of passing the information on to one another. And in the end, 6 million women watched them, and 1 million more women have gone on HRT since that menopause movement erupted about 3-4 years ago. And people began to understand that HRT was not going to kill them, and there was a new version that was body identical. And so many women do not know that still, and they are still terrified, and they've still got what their doctor told them or their mother told them. And not so much in the kind of London elite, but when you go out into the country, I work with the Glasgow menopause warriors, and the stories they tell me of what people tell them about the myths, around menopause and around HRT, and they are doing an amazing job to change that. But we have a lot of work to do. But we can make this change, and it comes from women up. And these are women who've advocated for themselves, the 1 million women. And of course, we did a poll. This Channel 4 gave us some money, and we were able to poll 4,000 women across the country, all ethnicities, different economic brackets. So it was a proper poll, and that's what they told us. They said 1 in 10 of us are leaving our jobs because of menopause symptoms. I'd be really interested to learn how it's working for legal aid lawyers, that statistic. But it is obviously a massive thing. And we found that 8% weren't applying for promotion, and 14% were going part-time, and lots of people were going on sick leave or depression or whatever, that they often didn't know was menopause. And in my my next book, How to Have a Magnificent Midlife Crisis, I also talk about women at a very senior level who often, show weakness because of their health for a few months, are managed out of their jobs and made to sign an NDA and take a payoff. And that certainly happens at quite a high level. And I've interviewed a doctor and a tech entrepreneur, actually, who just were disappeared in menopause with an NDA, which obviously makes it really hard. I've talked to some lawyers about that too. So that was a thing which went forward. But the thing I'm going to talk to you most about tonight is sort of mental health. And that survey of those 4,000 women, and you have to realize nobody bothered to ask women these questions before. Nobody had done this survey, and it's only 3 years ago. And we discovered 7 out of 10 women struggled with brain fog in menopause, and let's say peri-menopause too, because that is the brain fog party time. Actually, that's the worst bit. I was interviewing people for my next book about their brain fog bloopers, and the best one that came was a woman who, people lose their cars all the time, they can't drive on motorways, all that, they put their cat in the fridge. But the worst one for me was someone who'd got a car into the petrol station, was very nervous about driving, got out, opened the back door, got the petrol, poured it in the back seat, shut the door, went into bed, and then realised what she'd done. And I mean, it's menopause gold, that, but really, it's terrible, and we know how that kind of thing can be. But if you're at work and you're doing something very serious that really matters, and you forget some detail or someone's name, brain fog can really put you out of your job. So it's very serious. And again, that poll told us that there was the brain fog and memory loss. There was 84% of women were sleepless and exhausted in the 45 to 55 bracket. Is anyone here? And that was extraordinary. And actually 92% said they were sleepless or exhausted at some point. So, I mean, we laugh, but oh my God, we are sitting holding this in silence. And we're not telling anyone, and we're keeping calm and carrying on until we explode. And I think it was only because I exploded myself that I began to recognize the potential for explosion in other people. And the other thing here is, again, anxiety, which is what people talk to me a lot when I talk to groups of people in the city, or people come up to me afterwards and go, I'm really, really anxious. I can't present this. I can't, it's just a grinding anxiety they never had before. And we found that 69% of people had depression or anxiety. And that was done just after COVID, so I expect it's lower than that. But I'd say 50% of people have dealt with it in one way or the other in terms of low mood, the sort of anhedonia, the flatness that comes. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what happens to your brain. But first, I thought I'd give you some symptoms to make sure you can identify all your symptoms and symptoms of clients too.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of mental health stuff in here. This is just, you can have 52 symptoms of menopause if you want. This is just a basic set. But so many of them are mental health, aren't they? You think the fatigue, the low mood, the memory problems, the brain fog, it really is the anxiety, and then all the other things like night sweats and hot flushes that are waking you up in the middle of the night. Irritability, a top one, and I certainly for me, I did not realise in perimenopause in my 40s, I had 3 kids, the mum with Alzheimer's, quite a difficult husband, now replaced. And these were, my children and I agreed that we would write a list of the things I've thrown at the wall, at the kitchen wall over the years. And, I hadn't hit anyone, I hadn't injured anyone, I'm not an angry person at all, actually. But I threw blue poster paint, broccoli, a butternut squash, a butter dish that broke with all the bits of china in it, and a copy of Nigella's Christmas. So, and suddenly I'd have these inexplicable rages that I just couldn't hold the pressure down. And I can imagine if that were played out in the workplace, oh my God. So the good news is, of course, that now absolutely the NHS even understands that we can get body identical HRT. You can get this from your doctor, and what you want to do, and when you're also talking over to clients too, is get your data. Write a list of the symptoms, print off a symptom list, or look at one on your phone or whatever. Tick off the 20 symptoms, because it might not be hot flushes, it might be the anxiety, it might be sore joints, it might be, tinnitus. There's all sorts of strange symptoms, but take in your data so you can give that to your GP. And the things that ask for is body identical hormone replacement therapy, not the old synthetic kind, because the old synthetic kind was the stuff that all the headlines were about 20 something years ago, which said this will increase your risk of breast cancer. Now, as it turns out, that study was largely wrong, but what it was using was synthetic progestins, a progestin called medroxyprogesterone acetate, which was as horrible as its name sounds. And pregnant mare's urine was used to produce the estrogen. So you were putting this very odd drug in your body, which did some things and lowered hot flushes, but basically it's sort of more like what's in the pill, which isn't as safe as what's in HRT. Our new body identical HRT, which we're putting on extra pumps of, is it is just made from soy, and it's a molecular copy of your own hormone. So it's not like putting a strange object in your body, it's like topping up whatever's there. And particularly in perimenopause, you might have slightly low estrogen, and just topping it up with 1 pump a day or a tiny amount, that might just steady you. Or the progesterone, your progesterone is going down, it might help you to get a bit of that back. So it is really what, and this is difficult, titrating your own hormones, asking a doctor to do that. But, you can pursue it, and you can go to an NHS menopause clinic or privately and try. So this is estrogen gel, and you could also have a patch, an estrogen patch. That's Neutrogestin, the pills, which is a progesterone pill, which you take at night, and it helps you sleep because progesterone is generally calming, lowers anxiety. So that is quite good. Some people can't tolerate this combination, and you might have to go and try a few different things before you find what works for you. But on the whole, for about 90% of people, this is good. The pink tube is testosterone. We're going to discuss that later, but you'll enjoy that. So one of my heroines in this kind of journey to find out more is a professor in Australia who's done the very best work on mental health and hormones. She's called Jayashri Kulkarni, and she said to me, "There's not a steel plate at our necks stopping our hormones entering our brains." And what she's been amazing, she worked in the real old very gothic mental hospitals in Australia as a student. And she started giving women who had postnatal depression a bit of progesterone and estrogen, because after you have a baby, your hormones go from about 3,000 to 0 in 48 hours. Basically, your hormones walk out and you are left completely flat. And for 10% of women, that can lead to even psychotic episodes. And I'm sure you've all dealt with those sort of things, and perhaps in your work. But she realized that topping up those hormones a bit for some of these people who seem to have treatment-resistant postnatal depression made a huge difference. And then she started looking into what menopause was doing to women's brains when those hormones left the building again. And so one of the things, and this is, I think, a really useful tool for people, she has written this tool you can get online, and it's called the MenoD questionnaire. And quite simply, it's a rating scale to detect depression in menopause. And here I've just picked the first pages, a couple of pages: low energy, paranoid thinking, irritability, and you can look at what level, levels 1 to 4, you're going through these things. And she found that menopause depression is different from the regular clinical depression. And women who know they're depressed and they can look at themselves from the outside, it's not like a sort of black dog. It's more of a grey dog, and it's really interesting to try and work out what is hormones and what is life and all the other, what is psychiatric and what is actually to do with having low hormones and all the other stresses of life at that time. But it really is useful, worth downloading, just to take as evidence to your doctor or give to someone else, because that's not what your NHS doctor is taught. It's not in any part of the psychotherapy training, because I went through my partner's 4-year course. No mention of hormones. Hormones mentioned for trans people, but not mentioned for women, not mentioned for postnatal depression, not mentioned for menopausal depression. And it's just such a huge hole. It's one of the things I'm going to try and find. Anyway, at this point, what we've talked about mental health, before we go into some of the other bits, I'm going to bring you my friend and colleague and fellow campaigner, Farhana Shahzady, from the Family Law Menopause Project, and she is going to explain to you what is going on in women's heads and her clients' heads. And I'll switch myself over for a second. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Is this on? Yeah, fantastic. Well, I am a lawyer, and some of you will know me. I'm a family lawyer, and I'm writing there's a range of different people here. But first and foremost, I suppose I should say I identify as being a peri-menopausal lawyer. Yeah. And my pronouns are try me, which probably is good for a lawyer. I think I'm in the right spot for this. If we're doing self-disclosure, I think I realised a few years ago there was something wrong. I realised it when I tried to board a tube to take me to my job in Fulham, and I just could not get on the tube. Just couldn't do it. So I had to then take buses. It's a long way to Fulham from where I am in W9. And then I started to steal my mum's diazepams. I'm quite a smart person. I'm thinking there's something wrong here. So I spoke to my sisters, one of whom is a doctor. And she was very much, oh, I don't know what's going on. Go and see the GP, of which I went to the GP, who asks me what I do for a living. And I say, I'm a divorce lawyer. She says, that's terrible. That's such a stressful job. And then I got some antidepressants, which I thought, well, at least I don't have to steal the diazepams from my mum. So, there was a plus side. I do eventually figure out I probably need hormones, have blood tests, which the GP said that doesn't tell us anything at a particular age, and then make my way to a private menopause doctor and am helped. But it's not foolproof. I think it takes a lot of work and effort to find the right doses of HRT. I don't think I've quite cracked it, so I'm still good at my job. There's a lot of fight within me. But actually what I realised, and actually I do have to thank Kate for this, I read your book in 22, obviously saw the Davina documentaries, and I really wanted to think about my clients, because over the years I've seen a variety of different clients, often women, who've presented either as very angry and cross, which I can sometimes be, or very subdued and tearful, which I can sometimes be. And I hadn't realised that my clients might have been menopausal. And when I got there myself, I thought, oh God, that's it. And am I doing a good job? Am I delivering a good service because of this? So it's at that point, and having seen Kate's work and read Kate's work, I thought, I'm going to do a survey. I'm going to try and find out a little bit more. So I set up the Family Law Menopause project and did a small survey of family lawyers. I actually think the results would be reflective of all legal disciplines, actually. But when it came to family law, I think a lot of lawyers did identify that their clients perhaps were suffering, matrimonial hardship because of their menopause symptoms. So the obvious thing to do is then to ask clients, isn't it? Are you experiencing problems in your marriage or relationship because of menopause? And the very clear result was that is the case. So in 2022 with News and Health, I ran a survey, and the result was that 7 in 10, this is 7 in 10 women said menopause was having an impact on their marriages and led to the breakdown in their marriages. And we've already seen the stat, which Kate has given us, that there's 13 million women who are in perimenopause or menopause. So that means as lawyers, we must see these people quite a lot. 13 million women, 7 in 10 of these women are saying it's contributing to their relationship breakdown. I mean, I'll ask the room, has anyone ever asked their clients whether that's a problem for them? Or do we generally ask whether menopause made an issue for them? No, probably not, and that was the same with me. But they are in the room with us because they are suffering, and they do come to see us because of relationship breakdown. So I did quite a lot of work around that. I mean, one or two of the other really interesting results were in relation to domestic abuse, and 67% of women said that they felt domestic abuse and gaslighting really increased during this time, and was obviously contributing towards the breakdown of their marriage as well. Sex life, we did ask about that in the survey, and 75% of women said their sex life was impacted. And I think we probably all agree the hallmark of a good relationship is going to be communication and probably intimacy. And I think with the symptoms we've seen and Kate described, that's going to be impacted. And I think that's really sad. And I think as lawyers, and I think as family lawyers in particular, we're very good at triaging. We're very good with vulnerability, but we haven't been spotting it. And if we haven't been spotting it, I think we might be delivering bad outcomes. And the outcome I'm particularly interested in is financial. I'm a financial remedies lawyer. I know that I can make a big difference to financial outcomes, but I haven't been. I think when my client told me she couldn't work, I said to her, it's okay, when your divorce is over, you'll be fine. You'll get back to work. When I think about my own work, I've probably had about 4 jobs in 7 years. I have suffered in my work, with my work, and yet I expect my clients to go back to work. I tell them regularly that the statutory system will tell them that they've got to work, there'll be very little maintenance, they'll be clean breaked. At the same time, my clients, these women are often reading in the press that they're gold diggers, and they're wondering if they can dig the gold, if I can deliver them a settlement, which will be worthwhile. And we often can't. Actually, I think that's one of the big myths that we have, which is not the cohabitation myth, which I'm sure the family lawyers understand. It's the spouse myth. We don't deliver good outcomes, and women don't do terribly well, which is why I have, with Kate's help in her new work, talked about what I call money pause, which is the financial impact of divorce and menopause on women. And I think the data on that is massively interesting. If you have time, please read Kate's book. It's an excellent book. But I think we know anecdotally or otherwise that women do suffer and experience pension poverty. I think this is partly down to menopause, because I think menopause often represents a chapter in a woman's life. If she's had children, let's imagine, average age of her first child is 31. Yes, perimenopause, possibly mid-40s. So it's with women having children at 31, they may leave work. We know women do leave work. And at perimenopause, women might be leaving work, as we've seen with the survey, 1 in 10 women leaving work, and others reducing their hours. But I think women don't earn enough, frankly. And some of the pension stats, the poverty stats, are that a divorced woman who's non-cohabiting has pension wealth of £19,000 versus men who have £100,000. And that's work coming out of the University of Manchester. So I just think we need to be a little bit more aware as lawyers. There's lots of data I hope that we can look at, and we need to research and we need to survey. The other interesting things that came out of the survey, which I think applies to all lawyers, is that the women were saying that we don't ask them about their menopause, and that the outcomes they think, I mean, arguably could border on negligent at times. They think there's a knowledge gap. They think judges aren't trained and lawyers aren't trained, and that we need to try and do better. And I hope we do better. And I think it is by talking about it and sharing our own experiences too, that we should achieve a better result for our clients. But going back to divorce, just very briefly, I mean, there's the idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And I think we should remember that as we do our work. But, thank you.
That's fantastic. I'm so pleased that you were able to come today. And indeed, she's in the Money Was chapter in the book. So I'm going to talk a bit more now about just to explain to you how your brain genuinely changes, because this was a big revelation for me. So we're going to do a little bit of deep science, not deep science, but science. And what I did not understand until I started this work was how plastic women's brains were. And this is kind of a positive thing too, at last. And that our brains rewire 3 times in life. So in the 3 Ps, puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And you know how, your synapses are trimmed in adolescence and you become disinhibited, all sorts of things go on. In pregnancy, we've always heard about baby brain in a kind of negative way, you lose your baby, you can't remember your name, whatever it is. Actually, as it turns out, if you look at what happens to grey matter before birth and after, grey matter goes down. That's your kind of computer in your brain, your thinking stuff. So your grey matter goes down and it goes up again, and it reappears in different places after you've had a baby. So instead of it actually reappears in kind of facial recognition, emotional competence, and probably looking out for kind of people trying to go the baby over there, being aware of the room. But when you think about going back to work with those people skills that actually were to do with recognizing your baby's face and keeping her safe, actually when you go back to a boardroom or something, you can look around and you are better at recognizing what is going on people's facial expressions and their moods. And that brain change is portrayed negatively, and yet it is a reboot that makes us the kind of people we need to be as mothers. And obviously that doesn't happen to everybody, but perimenopause does. Perimenopause is a massive change to the brain. And I'm going to show you more about what happens, but it's also the moment, and I think when you're dealing with clients, this might be interesting, that you get the first onset of many psychiatric disorders. People who have not been bipolar their whole life pop up as bipolar, and normally that's diagnosed sort of in your 20s. And again, the depression comes too. And there's a lovely woman in Cardiff University, Ariana De Floria, who looked into the UK Biobank and ran perimenopause and bipolar, and guess what? They connected up on a huge scale. So it's really worth keeping in mind when you're talking to people of that age. Now, somebody asked me to cover perimenopause properly, so I am. Excuse me, it's really not. This graph is for you. This is the hormones throughout your life, and I don't know if you can see it very clearly. You see where I've done a big circle here and a big circle here. So progesterone is the orange one. It's going up and down every month, and then you get to perimenopause. It goes. It just dies away really fast. And that being your calming, loving, sleeping hormone gone. And sometimes that's great because you see the world really clearly. You know, we are raw, we see the world and we criticize it or whatever, but it's very hard to handle. And again, here's your estrogen, it's the pink line going steadily, takes these huge leaps in perimenopause and huge falls. Utterly, utterly unpredictable. But that's when we threw things, we dropped things. There's also something in the book called the perimenopausal sex surge that we won't discuss here, but it's very interesting. What you can see in terms of mental health is that you are completely destabilized. And some people manage this, but about 70% of people do not. And so you're up and down, and we all keep calm and carry on, and we all continue to do our jobs. But inside, we are, in turmoil. And it is really worth understanding that and giving yourself sympathy, because by the time you're in menopause, in a sense, when your periods have stopped in a year or so after, you may not feel as sort of perky as you did, but you're certainly steady. And once you're on HRT, obviously, again, you are lovely and steady and you don't have those hormonal ups and downs every month. So perimenopause is really the danger zone and we don't see it. And people didn't use that word until recently. It's just not well known. So, and this is another thing, and my favorite person in the menopause arena at the moment is Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who's written a book called The Menopause Brain, and she's at Val Cornell in New York and studying Alzheimer's in women. But one of the things she did was she got a woman aged 43 and 53, so premenopausal, postmenopausal, and red is the energy in the brain. And if you look at the premenopausal, the energy's gone down about 30% by the time you get to the postmenopausal woman, 43, 53 in this case. Perfectly normal person does not have Alzheimer's or anything like that, but that is a huge change. And I'm going to explain to you why it happens because it looks absolutely terrifying. So this is my favorite graph, and you think it's so important you understand this, which is that basically in menopause and perimenopause, your brain changes fuel. Nobody told us this. So estrogen fuels your glucose mechanism, and this is going from perimenopause to postmenopause. And that pink line is your glucose mechanism, your metabolism, crashing right down. You no longer have the fuel that's working your brain. But at the same time, because we're plastic, we're geniuses, we're superpowers, we start increasing our cerebral blood flow. And we're pumping blood into our brains and remembering things. And so we make this amazing comeback. But in the middle, chaos. Absolute chaos. And there are the people who overcome that and are brilliant, and this immediately starts compensating, but there are people who maybe a few years later find their brain is back to normal, and that's when they lose their job or they lose their family or they end up committing a crime. So it's a really significant thing to understand. And again, the grey matter volume going down in perimenopause, mysteriously rising after menopause. So presumably we become in some way geniuses or witches, or I really don't know how. But again, we are getting it, and no one's studied where that grey matter is going yet. And I'm looking forward to, I think, Lisa Mosconi will, to hear where it goes. And white matter, which is your kind of connected motorways in your brain, goes down. Now, this is obviously women who've not been on HRT. So this is a natural process, but it's very helpful because it does go back up. And the other thing worth noticing here is the red line, which is amyloid plaque deposition. And if you are a child of Alzheimer's, as I am, that's very interesting to you because amyloid plaque is a potential precursor of Alzheimer's, and so are tau tangles. And when estrogen goes down, amyloid plaques go up. Not to a dangerous extent in everybody, but if you are in that bracket of risk, it is really, really worth thinking about getting your estrogen back to protect your brain. It's not going to cure Alzheimer's, but what it's going to do is keeping your brain functioning as well as it possibly can. Basically, it's WD-40 in your brain. And, add a Mediterranean diet and some exercise to that, and you are making a shield against Alzheimer's. And I do talk about that in the book. But really, the idea that we weren't taught any of this, and it's really kind of exciting to understand that this stuff is going on in our brains. And the other thing that happened as I was doing these talks, every time I would go out to a room of people all over Britain, I would find people coming up to me and saying, I've been diagnosed as ADHD when I was 45. You know, I'm autistic. I'm an autistic person. I am really pleased to understand that I am that person, because I've always wondered what was going on and what I was masking in the past. And these are not people who've got perhaps a very obvious case, but they've been able to live their lives and mask things and cope. But when those loving mummy kind of gentle hormones all floated away, they saw themselves clearly in the mirror, and many people got diagnosed. And this is a lovely woman who's in my book, next book, Rose Matthews. She got diagnosed, and she also decided she was non-binary, so we're going to talk about her as they now. But they struggled with the hormonal crash with menopause. They got HRT and their diagnosis, and they have adapted their life. And they came to my book party. I don't know if you saw those. And they had to think about it beforehand and plan to be in a crowded basement with a lot of people, and plan, you know, to take 3 hours of quiet afterwards, and worked out, you know, exactly what training they were going to go on. And they did it. And they said to me, that wouldn't have been possible before, that was a really difficult thing for them. And in a sense, they were able to cope with that because they had knowledge of themselves. So, you know, that may be of interest and worth looking out for, and it just keeps popping up. Nearly moving swiftly. But I had to work for the menopause charity because they didn't have anyone to write their signs, because we didn't have any budget for advertising. And someone gave us this big billboard on the M6. So I wrote, "Rest your sex drive, 51% of women say menopause affects their relationship." And what we see is, well, two things here. One is that vaginal dryness is massive. Dry vulvas in menopause. And particularly if you're not taking HRT, you lose 15% of collagen across your body. So when you're, you know, around 45 to 50, you're losing 15% of collagen in the face. Also here, you're spending all this money on Chanel, absolutely no money on Chanel. Really, really worth going to your doctor, because you can get it for free. And it is vaginal estrogen. It's things like Vagirux or a Vestin cream. I use something called the Cell, which is a very good gel that I actually get privately. It's terrific. But you know, basically you get a pessary that you put in a couple of times a week. And it doesn't only bring back the collagen to your vulva and your vagina, but it also affects UTIs. And by keeping that area all the tissue thick and comfortable, you're much less likely to get UTIs. And they did a study in California of a bunch of women who were in their 70s, and they had UTIs up to 8 times a year. Were taking lots of antibiotics. They gave half of them vaginal estrogen, and guess what? Their UTIs halved in number, and some just didn't get them at all. So it immediately had a profound effect. And if you're dealing with any older people, that is really worth knowing too, that, you know, nobody is connecting the hormones in our bodies and in our urethras and in our bladders. And of course, you know, it works, and it's safe for cancer patients too, because it's just incredibly low dose. The other fun thing, and obviously we're very keen on this bit, testosterone. This is my t-shirt. Someone gave me testosterone. It's not just for boys. And you can see what happens with female testosterone. When you're about 20, your testosterone is higher than your estrogen. They did not tell you that at school. It's the biggest hormone that young women are making. If you see a bunch of 20-year-olds on the tube all shouting, that is why. And then it goes down and down and down. So you didn't have the menopausal crash where it goes to 0. But by the time you're 50, you don't have much. And I didn't have any. And when I got prescribed HRT, I got the three-legged stool, I got estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And particularly testosterone in terms of energy, in terms of get up and go, in terms of muscle building, in terms of bone building, and obviously in terms of libido, very good. The only reason the NHS will let you have testosterone, as we know, is if you go in and say, my libido is really down, I'm not serving my husband. No, you're not always going to have libido just for yourself or anything. You've got to kind of, anyway, libido is going to destroy your relationship. You can get testosterone. It's very hard to get. You often have to go to an NHS menopause clinic on a long waiting list, and lots of GPs won't prescribe it. But it is very much a female hormone. And if we are going to work till we're 67 or 70, having the full set of hormones back is really, really good. And interesting stuff on testosterone and Alzheimer's and breast cancer and all sorts of good things, which the research is only coming through on. So I am tracking that, but there's not enough big studies through. Again, everybody says to me, but what are the alternatives to hormones? You know, and I go, there are none, because, you know, sage tea is not going to give you your hormones back. If you can't take HRT, then lifestyle and nutrition and vitamin D and maybe, you know, CBD and, you know, meditation, there's a lot of other things you can do, but you really have to do a whole series of pieces of self-care that take quite a lot of time. And, you know, if we're dealing with people in prisons, for instance, who can't get the diet, who can't get the exercise, getting the HRT into those women in prisons, you know, really is the one thing that can give them a step off the ground. You know, while, you know, you look at on the Instagram, laws, people saying, you know, got to improve your lifestyle, you've got to do more jogging, you've got to have time to do all that. So, you know, there's a lot of people selling a lot of things to women who haven't been informed about their hormones. And, you know, this is very good. This is the Nika magnet. And it's double-sided. I have tested it on some of my friends, and you pop it in your pants, 2 bits, like that, and it stops you having hot flushes. Does it? And it sort of pings across the room, and we tested it. I got a number of friends to test it. They had a hilarious time, had absolutely no effect on anything. But they enjoyed it. People get stuck to shopping trolleys. Anyway, but the other thing is, you know, I really hate the exploitation and the menopause capitalism. And this is like Morrison launches menopause bays in its stores, and they get the M tick, which is a tick that they've got to pay for. Different products have to pay for the tick, and you can get menopause Colgate, menopause Dove, and menopause multivitamins. And, you know, so they put all that rubbish all together on the shelf, label it menopause, and then here we've got 10 menopause pads. You know, if you're leaking, just tell them about vaginal estrogen so people don't leak. You know, there's that sort of thing, and I really feel very strongly that, you know, people talk about medicalizing menopause. I think so important to understand about hormones, and yes, do everything else, but, you know, people are being fooled by that. And there are several, you know, great books. You know, that's the XX thing, which is Dr. Lisa Mosconi's book, Dr. Louise Newson, probably the guru in Britain and the best informed scientifically with her book. And there's lots of, but the other thing which we're trying to talk about too at the Menopause Charity, and this is one of their graphs, is that HRT has a profound long-term effect on you. By maintaining your hormones, you maintain your brain, your body, your cardiovascular system. And women who have early menopause, and a lot of women in economically difficult situations, Black women are more likely to have earlier menopause. Asian women have, I think on average it's 46 in India. That's one of the studies. People have menopause at a different time. The earlier you have your menopause, the longer you are running without hormones. It is really important when young women have menopause that they do get topped up. And what we've discovered by looking at, you know, women in early menopause and women not, is that HRT halves the risk of osteoporosis, brittle bones. It reduces all-cause mortality, it halves the risk of coronary heart disease, and it reduces diabetes and indeed colon cancer. And particularly I've been campaigning on osteoporosis. 1 in 2 women break a bone after 50 due to an osteoporotic break. Hormones build bones. NHS doesn't tell you that, school doesn't tell you that. And we discovered, we did a big campaign on it, and I did all the sort of science, and I got a grant. It was amazing, so I could actually spend some time on it. And we discovered that HRT increased bone density over 2 years by 7%. Now your bone density goes down by 10 to 20% around perimenopause and menopause. So getting your bones back and keeping them at that level, got rid of that risk of those women who just fall over and somehow break their wrist in 7 places at age 60, and it seems sort of inexplicable. The people who, have got broken hips and don't recover. So it's a huge saving for the NHS if they got more women onto HRT, and particularly women who are at risk of osteoporosis. So that was a huge thing. Again, useful info for people. The Balance app, really, really good, scientifically based. Treatment, HRT, alternatives to HRT, you can track your symptoms in there. There's a really good symptom list. You can track your periods if you're in perimenopause. And it basically has information and leads you to lots of podcasts too on every single subject. If you've got a particular menopause specialism, that's where to go. The British Menopause Society website, very good on big complicated issues. So if it's something kind of menopause and endometriosis and this, that's sort of where the doctors go. That is worth looking at if there's something complicated. And the NHS is better than it was. And I remember ringing the NHS saying, I see the word perimenopause is not on your website. We're just checking for our documentary that it's not there. 3 weeks later. So you can have some effect in the world. This is just two people I follow on Instagram who are fantastic menopause campaigners and really enjoyable to follow because they don't just talk about menopause but life. And so this is Karen Arthur, who's rather a star of this book because we talk about her creative awakening. She was a teacher, worked out her job with menopause, and is now a fashion designer. And is, she'll do you a nice wedding outfit. Very, very good. So she is Menopause Fast Black on Instagram, and she has a podcast, which is really good. And this is Dr. Nigat Zarif, and she has amazing TikTok, also in Urdu and Punjabi, some of it. And she campaigns, and she's written a book, and she really, really tries to go into her own community. Her dad's an imam, and she's taken the coil into a mosque. Well done, Nigat. So she's a really good campaigner, but worth following to get that sense of what's going on in that community. And I'm about to finish now, but so this is basically the second book I've written around menopause and midlife, because the research changed. I did this book on menopause 3 years ago. And the research has grown and grown and grown. And also what I've learned from rooms like this about it being a huge part of midlife. So I've written about mind and body and spirit in this book, and not just about the kind of medical talk, which I've been doing tonight. So that is what we're doing. I also have left some cards here. So if I can help your workplaces or anything with in some way taking this forward or going into prisons or whatever we can do, I'm really interested in giving people a hand on that. So thank you.
Amazing.